Okay, very good.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bronwyn. I'll be moderating this panel. First, we're going to go through and introduce ourselves to kind of know a little bit more about us, and then we're going to go through some of the questions that you submitted, and then if we have time, we'll go through any questions that kind of come up as we're going. So first of all, my name is Bronwyn. I am originally from New Mexico. I currently go to school in WashU in St. Louis, and I couples matched with my partner who's going into plastic surgery, and we're going to Hopkins next year. I'm interested in a fellowship, probably REI or MFM. So next, let's go to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Bechet. I am originally from New Jersey. I attend the Rowan University School of Osteopathic Medicine, and I also couples matched with my significant other. He's going into internal medicine, and we both matched at Atlantic Health Morristown Medical Center, which is also in New Jersey. And I'm interested in just being a generalist.
Thank you. So next we'll go to Parissa.
Hey guys, so I'm Parissa Fala. I'm originally from Texas. I'm going to school at Harvard right now, and a matched, couples matched also actually, to the Brigham MGH OB/GYN program, and my partner did anesthesia and will be at Brigham. Yeah, excited to be here.
Okay, thank you. So next we'll go to Abby.
All right. Hey guys, my name's Abby Gorin. I originally am from Maryland. Went to University of Maryland for medical school, and I'm also going to Hopkins. So Bronwyn and I are going to be co-interns, and I'm never leaving Maryland apparently. Interested in, not quite sure. I think I could be a very happy generalist, maybe also minimally invasive surgery, but TBD.
Okay. Next we'll go to the person who organized all of this. So Rodrigo.
Hey y'all, my name is Rodrigo. I'm from Alabama. I go to the University of Alabama at Birmingham for med school, and I very happily matched at the University of North Carolina. I am interested in medical education, and within OB/GYN, I'm interested in gynonc, maybe MIGS, I don't know. More interested in the guidance side of things, but you know, I could surprise people and do something OB related.
Okay, next we will go to Corbin.
Hey everybody, from Atlanta. My name's Corbin, from Atlanta, Georgia. At med school right now, St. Louis University School of Medicine. Going to New York Presbyterian, the Weill Cornell campus. Interest, gynonc, possibly Urogyne, but more heavily gynonc.
And then last we have Jensen.
Hello, I'm Jensen. I'm originally from New York, and I go to the Medical School for International Health in Israel. See, we have some representation out here, which I'm excited about. And I'm pretty open, but I think I'm interested in REI or MFM, but TBD. Could easily be a generalist, could easily do any of the others. Sorry, and I matched at Mayo. I'm going to Mayo.
So that's just a little bit about us. So now we'll jump into some of the questions you submitted. So we'll start off with some stuff kind of about ERAS, and then talk a little bit about OB/GYN in general. So what advice do you have for writing a personal statement? So we'll start off with Abby.
Advice for a personal statement. I feel like this is one of the places in the application, or kind of the only big place where you can really set yourself apart other than your grades, all your extracurriculars, etc. So I feel like definitely don't be afraid to make it personal. You know, everyone has a different reason and direction why OB/GYN, why medicine. So definitely just take the opportunity to let yourself shine, and make sure you get a good amount of people to read it. I think, you know, a good number of people that you're comfortable with, but I think the more eyes can definitely help pick up on any wording or phrasing that might sound weird, any grammatical errors, or just different people have different opinions on what sounds good in a statement. So just getting multiple pairs of eyes on it for sure.
Next, go to Corbin.
Yeah, a lot of it, Abby covered it, but I'd also say it was the perfect spot, I think, for me to kind of pair my outside interest outside of med school with OB/GYN and why I wanted to go into it. Like a lot of my time since I was 3 years old was playing soccer. and even coaching soccer. So I talked about that in retrospect to the things I liked about OBGYN, the team aspect of it and whatnot. And a lot of people in interviews kept bringing it back up. So it's just a good way, I think, to tie who you are about a person into what you want to do with your career.
And Sarah?
Yeah, definitely echoing what Corbin and Abby have said. I felt that in every single interview, someone brought up something, like one of the interviewers always brought up something that I had mentioned in my personal statement and asked me to talk about it a little bit more. And like Corbin and Abby had said, it's really one of the only places in your application where you get to kind of express yourself and what interests you specifically and pull and draw from any other experiences that you've had along the road. So I would definitely take advantage of it and definitely have a lot of people read it to give you different perspectives and, you know, pick up on grammar and all those little silly mistakes that might be overlooked.
And then Parissa?
Yeah, I think one of the things I can add is I came into like my interest in OBGYN late, and a lot of people at my own institution, but also like from my application, could probably see that. And so I use the personal statement as an opportunity to explain like how I made that transition to becoming interested in OBGYN. And I also think that the personal statement's an opportunity to tie everything together and tell a story about who you are and what you bring to that residency program, so that like when they go like behind closed doors to talk about each applicant, they can be like, oh, that's the girl who's interested in this. That's the guy who's interested in this. That's the person who, you know, will bring this to our program. And that's kind of what you want to convey, I think, in your personal statement.
And then Jensen?
Sorry. Nothing really new to add. I think, as everyone kind of said, this is the one place where you kind of come to life in your application. Otherwise, you're just a series of numbers that are probably similar to the other numbers that they're looking at. And this is where you say, like, if you have any unique experiences, anything you've lived through that captures your character. You've all written essays before, so you kind of know this already. But one thing, a piece of advice that I got was to kind of don't try and teach the people who have done this for their entire lives why you want to do OB-GYN, because like they know why you want to do it. They do it. And if anything, your rationale is going to be a little bit flat. So I think just really using it to speak to your character and what qualities you have that are true and honest, and that they'll be able to see when they interview you and will make them want to interview you.
And then Rodrigo, do you have anything to add?
I guess more logistically, I would start your personal statement now if you haven't already. It's something that is harder than you think it's going to be. It's hard to kind of capture all these different things that you want to display about yourself on your personal statement. I'd also try not to repeat yourself too much on your personal statement. If you've already demonstrated something elsewhere on your application, space and is kind of precious on your URAS application. At the same time, you want to keep it brief enough that people are actually going to want to read the whole thing. So definitely keep it to a page. Is my advice at any rate. I feel like if it goes onto a second page, they're less likely to read onto that second page. And then for any folks out there who are LGBT identified, that's kind of where I came out on my application, just to kind of let programs know that that was who part of my identity and who I am, just because there's not really another place you can explicitly state that on your application.
All really good advice. Now, the next question is, who wrote your letters of recommendation? Who do you advise are like the best people to ask? We'll go with Corbin.
Yeah, so my biggest, I guess, impact letter recommendation actually came from one of my first away rotations. Like I knew I wanted to be back in the Northeast. I was there for undergrad and everything. And so I planned on my ways up there, and I just did an early one started like August or so, mid-August into September. And that one letter like kept coming back up at all of my other interviews. They did talk about other letters from my home institution, but I think just because my home institution's in the Midwest and all the people that, I interviewed with in the Northeast just didn't know them, they didn't talk about them quite as much.
Okay, and Parissa?
So because I kind of came into my interest in OBGYN a bit later, I ended up having 2 OBGYN letters. So one for my chair, and then one from 2 of the faculty members that I did worked closely with on a sub-I. I actually had my 3rd clinical letter was actually an internal medicine letter, just because I had worked with a particular faculty member for about a year, like in their primary care clinic, and felt like she could really talk about like how I like improved over the course of the year, who I was as a person, kind of beyond like just a clinical role. And then my 4th letter was, so like my interest and background is in global surgery. And I actually had a trauma surgeon write my 4th letter kind of from a mentorship and like research perspective. And just to talk about like what my contributions to that field have been like over time. So a little bit of a different like approach. I think some people try to get like 3 OB letters and one that's different, but I've heard, and my understanding is that medicine and surgery letters can kind of be complementary to your OBGYN letters, and they appreciate those perspectives too, if that's what you have available to you.
And Sarah?
Yeah, so just like Parissa, I had 2 OB letters. I worked really closely with some of the residents on research at my home institution. So I was able to really get to know my program chair, and I got a letter from him. And then I also got one from the OBGYN who kind of became a mentor for me from my 3rd year OB clerkship. And then I got one from my surgery clerkship. Again, I worked really close with the surgeon, and those are definitely skills that you use in OBGYN. And then I got one from medicine as well.
And then Jensen?
So I ended up doing, as an IMG, obviously I needed to get US letters. So I had my chair letter, and then the rest of them were from rotations I did in the States. So I had 2 other OBGYN letters, and then 1 critical care sub-I letter. It's kind of a unique position. I think most IMGs will be dealing with this, but basically your letters are going to be whatever electives you get, because any US physician letter is better than what you're going to have from home. I did have a couple of people who like randomly knew the chair of our department in Israel, but that's few and far between. So it's pretty much just whatever you can get is what you'll go with. And a few people mention them here and there if they happen to know the person, but I wouldn't say that was a super common experience on the interview trail for me.
And then Abby?
Similar to what a lot of people had echoed. All of my letters actually were from OBGYN faculty. One was from our chair, which was a requirement. Everyone applying OB at my school had to get a chair letter. And then I got 2 letters from attendings that I worked with at my home institution on sub-Is. One of them I had also done some research with, so she kind of knew me in both of those capacities. And then I did an away rotation and got a letter from who became my mentor on that away rotation as well. And I know things, maybe we can touch on the question in the sidebar, any advice for getting letters with aways being canceled? It seems like a good number of us got letters from where we did our aways, and I know it's going to be tough and different this year, I think, with COVID kind of messing up a lot of plans for people to do away rotations. So I'm not sure if anyone has any good advice on kind of how to move forward with getting those letters that maybe you were really hopeful to get from your aways and that's not really happening anymore.
That's a good question and a concern. And
yeah.
In order you did an away, I can speak at least for myself. I did an away and I didn't get a letter from anyone that I worked with. So even if you do aways, it's not necessary that you get a letter, but I know sometimes you have to get a letter from them. But Rodrigo, if you can.
Yeah, so I didn't do my away until later. I think it started in September and went through October. So I wasn't doing the away to get a letter necessarily. My letters were from both my clerkship and my home AI or sub-I, whatever you call them, at your institution. I got a letter from, fortunately, UAB has some heavy hitters in both OB and GYN. So I got a letter from Brian Casey, who's pretty well known in the MFM world, and then Dr. Huz, the president of the SGO. So they were my 2 main letter writers. The thing that they told us, and I think is good advice, is if someone offers to write you a letter, say yes. You can have 10 letters and assign them to different schools if you want. So if you know, for example, someone who wrote one of your letters has a connection to school XYZ, you can assign that letter to that school. And and not use it for any other school. So don't be afraid to mix and match the letters you do have if it makes sense for you on your application. And then to someone's point in the sidebar about residents writing letters, I think it's much better to have an attending write letters. I wouldn't seek out a resident letter. I don't think they carry that much weight, to be honest. I think the value of having residents weigh in is more on your evaluations and stuff that play into your dean's MSPE. So yeah.
Another kind of common question theme is, how do you go about picking the programs that you're applying to? Like, what number did you apply to, and how do you spot malignant programs and know whether or not to apply to them or kind of avoid them in general? So we'll start with Rodrigo, since we.
Yeah. Oh, and then just really quickly back to the letter. Someone's asking about like a PEDS letter. I think you have to go by the program. So I actually, when I was assigning letters, I went to each program's website and looked at what their requirements were, and just make sure you're meeting at least those base requirements. And then, if you worked with someone who's in pediatrics for 3 years because you did research with them, or you worked in a free clinic with them, that letter is going to carry more weight than someone you rotated with a week on OB-GYN with. So really, whatever makes sense for your application and whatever your history with the person is, let it kind of guide you. One of my letters that I assigned intermittently in programs was with Dr. Parker, who is a breast surgical oncologist. And like Carissa was saying, those perspectives can kind of complement your OB-GYN letters. But back to Bronwyn's question about picking programs, I actually kind of wish I'd done this a little differently. I was very anxious going into this process, so it was kind of hard for me to really assess how competitive I was and which programs were reach programs, which programs were safety programs. So I kind of knew what the schools in my region were, and I know that you're more likely to get interviews in your region. So I told myself a certain percentage of the programs I'd apply to would be within my region. Honestly, I could try to pick a mix between community and academic. I wasn't sure what I wanted going into interview season. That's another thing I wish I'd done differently. I wish I'd really sat down and figured out where I saw myself. Turns out I really want to be at an academic program, so it didn't make a lot of sense for me to apply to those community programs. As far as number of applications go, that's a really personal decision. I will say take any advice you get with a grain of salt, including my own. There will be people who tell you to apply to 15 programs. There will be people that tell you to apply to 100 programs. I've heard a lot of people talk about this 20-20-20 rule. 20 programs for sure, safety programs, 20 programs in the middle, 20 programs you consider reach programs. If that makes you feel okay, just do whatever's going to make you feel okay moving forward. I applied to too many programs, fortunately. I got more interviews than I could go on. But like I said, going into it, I had no idea what that was going to look like on the other side. So it's kind of hard for me to really give good advice on that front. And then as far as malignant programs, there were some programs that people told me I was going to hate because X, Y, Z, and then I went and I loved them. So I would say just let the interview day speak for itself. Unless you know for a fact that a program is, if you did it away somewhere and it's not for you, then I would just kind of give places a chance.
Carissa?
Yeah, I think this is such a tough question because just like Rodrigo said, it's really hard to know where you are. I think it's really important to rely on resident mentors and faculty mentors. And I say it like mentors because like Rodrigo said, a lot of people have different opinions and you kind of ultimately have to decide which opinion feels most comfortable for you. I can speak from the couples matching perspective. I was kind of told to apply to at least, I would say 10 or 12 more programs than I would have personally applied for to account for that. And I will say that more and more people are applying into OB, more people are applying to more places in OB, which is causing everyone to have to just apply to more regardless. It doesn't mean anything about your application, but I will say that sometimes getting interviews is a little bit random. It's not, you not getting an interview doesn't mean that your application wasn't good. And so it's kind of good to be a little bit more liberal with how many places you apply to just to account for that. And I know we'll go into this later and there's ways to advocate for yourself, but you know, I think it's just really good to talk to your mentors and have people be really honest with you about where they think your application sits and where people at your school like usually apply and how many, like our school sent us a list of like, this is where students typically apply, just to help us even like start picking out like anything, because it's so hard. There's so many programs. So that's kind of my like very general advice about that.
That's good. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I agree that this is really hard. I think that as medical students, we want like a solid number. Okay, these are my scores. This is how many programs I'm supposed to apply to. But I really don't think that there is. I think that you have to be realistic. As like for me, I'm an osteopathic student, so there is a stigma. I mean, the field is generally more allopathic friendly, so you have to kind of decide whether you want to go to an academic program, a community program, university program. Put that into consideration, and then take account, you know, where you stand as an applicant. Like Persa said, talk to your mentors who will be honest with you and tell you where you fall. And then I also couples matched, and I was given the same exact advice to apply to at most 20 more programs than I would individually, to kind of account for that. And then there is a geographical bias. So you tend to get interview invites around the area where you're from, because those programs know what kind of students your school has trained, and so they are more knowledgeable about it, and therefore they will be more inclined to offer you an interview invite. Also reach out to your school and ask for a list of alumni and where they have previously matched, because your chances are higher at those programs, and kind of weighing all those into consideration, and then how much you can afford to apply to. If you can afford to apply to a lot more programs, then I was very anxious, and I applied to as many programs as I could. On September 14th, I was going in there and like falling into the trap of adding more programs to apply to. But like I said, I don't think that there's a specific number. It's kind of just weighing in everything and really constructing that list of programs that really fit what you're looking for.
Jensen?
So as an IMG, obviously we are encouraged to apply to a lot more programs than AMGs or even DO students sometimes. One thing is it's less about how competitive you are as an applicant, unfortunately, for IMGs. One thing I noticed is that for the most part, IMGs kind of get the same opportunities regardless of what your like qualifications are. And then with like very rare exceptions, you might, if you're a really phenomenal student, you might get a couple of like really top program interviews, but for the most part, you're dealing with the same selection. But one thing that I did to try and maximize my chances is I'm from New York, and most IMGs end up doing their residency in New York because a lot of programs there are more IMG friendly. And I was worried that because I'm from New York already, people would just assume that programs outside of New York, that I wouldn't want to go to them, or that I wasn't taking them seriously. And so I tried to do my away rotations in a bunch of different parts of the country, which I know right now is maybe not super feasible, but if there's any way to demonstrate on your application that you're comfortable moving anywhere, living anywhere, that you're really excited about the programs you're applying to, I think that can be a huge game changer. One strategy as an IMG, I was like, you know, I was willing to move to Israel for med school, so I'm willing to move to Minnesota, you know, like you just, it's an honest answer because you did move to a different country to go to school. So you are willing to move to wherever, you're willing to do a new experience and be open to that. But otherwise, I agree, it is a very individualized process, and you kind of have to weigh your options and see like what number you will personally feel good about, because it's not going to be a number that someone tells you.
Definitely. Corbin?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I mean, you guys answered mostly everything I was going to say about it. Yeah, it's very personalized, and it's a good time to just be honest with yourself and have, you know, your mentors should be people that are honest with you as well, and talking with them and working together and see what works best for you, and then going from there.
Okay. And Abby?
Yeah, just kind of echoing what a lot of people said. If you have any, you know, mentors or even deans of student affairs that can kind of look up objective data from years past and see where you might fit in terms of appropriate number of programs to apply to, or kind of give you guidance on, you know, here's alumni from our school that have similar scores, grades to you. You know, as much as I hate that, you know, those matter. They do. They're not the most important thing, but it can help sometimes student affairs people or mentors to get a rough idea of people that have been similar to you based on those objective aspects to give you a little bit of guidance. But I think kind of on the contrary to that, I think Parissa had said, so many people are applying to so many programs now. So even if you have, even if you're at the top of your class and had an amazing step score and whatnot, I still really feel like it's becoming so important to apply pretty broadly, meaning to a good mix of different types of programs, some top programs if that's something you're interested in, some mid-tier programs, some different types of programs, community programs, because you just never know where you're going to get bites, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not doing something right or you're not a great applicant, but just it is really becoming so random. So I feel like no matter what, you really do need to kind of spread yourself in terms of where you apply.
Okay. Now we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about interviews. I know there's a question about when do most interviews take place, which I can just answer really quickly. So usually they take place, the majority of them are in November and December. There can be some that are also in October and into January, but the heart of them are going to be kind of in that November, December range. So now for the panelists, kind of questions about how did you prepare for interviews, especially if maybe you're not very good at talking about yourself, and if you have any advice about how to talk about like a red flag or a lower grade or something that might be a weakness on your application. So we'll start with Rodrigo.
First and foremost, I think it's important to, when you're going into an interview, to obviously read about the program itself. You don't want to go in blind. You want to go prepared with questions. You want to show that you're interested in the program. And frankly, a lot of the programs don't do a great job talking about themselves on the website, so that can be kind of hard to do sometimes. So even like something I would do when I was going, traveling places for interviews, I would usually go get a bowl of ramen for lunch the day when I got in the city, if I got there early enough. And so if they asked me, how do you like the city? I could say, oh, I ate at this ramen place. It was really good. So that's something silly, but something that can make you feel prepared to talk to people about those random little questions that come up. The other thing is to really know your application well. I think you can get into the middle of interview season and you can forget that you wrote about this one little thing that no one had asked you about in your prior 10 interviews, and all of a sudden interview number 11, they're asking you about this activity you did as a first-year medical student that you hadn't thought about since you put it on your ERAS application. So really review your ERAS application. Don't put anything on your application that you wouldn't want to talk about on an interview. I mean to say, something that you wouldn't be able to talk about with substance. And then just kind of relax and realize that you're there to interview them as much as they're interviewing you. You're trying to figure out if they're a good fit for you. So if you kind of give yourself that agency walking in, it can make those stressful situations a little less stressful.
Parissa?
Yeah, honestly, like not a ton to add to that. I think just like Rodrigo said, make sure your application doesn't have anything you couldn't talk about. Like, I think if you do that, you're already protecting yourself from getting really tripped up by questions during the interview process. I think OB/GYN interviews are becoming increasingly about like behavioral questions. I went to some interviews where it was purely behavioral questions, and that can be really stressful to deal with. I think one thing you can do is like, in advance of interview season, just start looking up like what are behavioral questions that people could ask you, and start coming up with maybe a story in your mind of like what can help you answer those questions. At the end of the day, I think we all showed up to interviews where we're like, oh, I didn't even think about that question. Like, let me try and figure out a story to tell you like based on that. And the reality is you just get kind of better at it as you go throughout the process. I would say that you should try and account for the fact that you'll get exhausted towards the end. And so while towards the middle, you'll be like, okay, I got this, no more need to like review things. As you get to those like last 5 or 6 interviews, definitely go back and look at your application again, remind yourself of kind of why you're doing this and that you're really excited because it's just hard to keep it up. So yeah, I think that's kind of my advice to add on to what Rodrigo said.
And then Abby, if you could go next, and then also maybe explain to everyone what behavioral questions are.
So I can start with that. So behavioral questions, and other people can add in or jump into, but I feel like kind of adding to what Parisa said, I definitely went on some interviews where it was purely behavioral. Most of them were a good mix between your kind of regular run-of-the-mill interview questions with a few behavioral questions sprinkled in. But it's more of questions kind of trying to see how you're going to respond to either a situation they might throw at you, like an ethical question about what would you do in this situation, or, tell me about a time when you were a good leader. I feel like I had an interview where each team or each room or station was a different, I guess, behavioral aspect, like leadership and different types of topics. So definitely start thinking about now, even like as you're going through rotations, situations that have kind of stuck out in your mind that have taught you some important lessons, or just that you've remembered and that are just sticking in the back of your mind that you can kind of pull from during interview season to reflect on and to answer some of those kinds of questions. And kind of like Parisa echoed as well, but you are going to kind of hit a sweet spot maybe halfway around your interview season where you feel like you're kind of on top of your game the most. And you can sometimes schedule your interviews. Scheduling gets tricky, but sometimes you can pick when your interviews are going to be. Sometimes it's it's a lottery system, but sometimes you can actually go on and schedule. So if you have somewhere that you really, really want to go, or you're really heavily considering, and you are able to pick that exact date, it might be a good idea to schedule that around the middle of your interview season, when you've had enough practice so that you know really how to answer all of the common questions that might get thrown at you, but you're not so exhausted that you're at the end and you just really don't care anymore. So there's definitely a sweet spot.
Okay. And then Corbin?
Yeah, kind of echoing one of the things that Abby talked about that I did that helped me was it was about halfway through third year, I started actually like writing down like the memorable patients or interactions, good and bad. I actually didn't have too many behavioral questions on my interviews, but for the times that I did have them, I felt prepared just because I was studying from, I guess, this, if you want to call it a diary of experiences that I had during third year and even my fourth year sub-Is. Because one of the cool things is that, you as a med student, you've gone through so many things that one experience usually can cover like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 behavioral questions, depending on what that experience was for you. Or at least you can make it cover 3 or 4 different questions, depending on how it's asked. So that was something that like it definitely helped. Again, it's one of those things where if you say, hey, if you're not good at interviewing, best thing is just like sitting and like down and talking with somebody. It never hurts to have like a mock interview, even if it's with one of your mentors or even one of your friends. And just saying like, hey, can we just have a mock interview? Act as if you don't know me. If you feel comfortable sharing your application with them, or just giving them a list of the things that a list of the things that you've done and said, hey, talk to me about this experience. Because the things that you're passionate about, they want to see that, that same passion come out when you're talking with them in an interview about it. So if you've had experience, talking about those things, even with just your friends, family, anybody else, it's going to help you in an interview. Because it kind of goes back to what everybody's saying, like inside and out, you've got to know your application and the things that you hit on, whether it's in your personal statement or if they want you to clarify something that they just didn't get, they're going to ask you about it. I think kind of like Bristol was saying earlier, myself, I was, I switched into OB-GYN kind of late as well. And so they wanted to say, hey, like what made you switch? And it's one of those questions, you're get used to answering it, but always remember that when you're going on interviews, especially towards the end, this is the first time they are asking you that question, even though in your head it's like, oh my God, I'm getting asked this for like the umpteenth thousandth time. You still have to give a full explanation and a passionate explanation as to whatever they're asking.
Sarah?
Yeah, I agree with everybody. Like Corbin, I created a Google Doc somewhere in the middle of my third year, and it was just ideas for personal statement, and then just experiences that I was having that I could pull from when it came to interview time. So that I found that was very helpful. Another thing is make sure you read over any research abstracts that maybe you did earlier in medical school and just revisit them. And like everybody said, really know your application, because I got asked a lot about research that I did like the summer of first year. And you really want to be prepared to talk about that if it was something that you were really passionate about. And then another thing was pre-interview dinners. So some programs will have dinners the night before your interview, and I found them very important. It's an atmosphere for you to bond with the residents. In some programs, the residents have a lot of say. And, you know, if they really liked you, and it's kind of more for you to put input about who you are and what you can bring to their program, and more time for you to learn about their programs too. So I found those very.
And then Jensen.
So I think Corbin kind of said most of what I was going to say. The only thing I'll add is that I found I added in a few responses to behavioral questions that were non-medicine and especially non-OB related. And I think that was a huge help, because most people answer with, you know, like the patient, like this memorable patient, whatever, and a lot of the cases can be really similar. And so having something that was just like a personal experience of mine, whether it's like a hobby and just like making a fun spin on the question, that sort of like lightened the mood a lot, and I think was well received at most places, but just to spice things up a little.
Next, I'm going to kind of switch a little bit to away rotations. I know we've touched on them a little bit, mostly in terms of doing letters of recommendation. But next, kind of like talk about doing away rotations and how they may have helped, even if it's getting interviews versus helping you kind of come up with your rank list. So first we'll go with Abby.
So my situation, I was trying to follow my partner who had matched 3 years beforehand. So I did an away at the place where he's a resident, and that is where I ended up matching. So that worked out well for me, but I know it doesn't always work out for everybody. But either way, I think away is, you know, whether or not your goal is to match there necessarily, is a great time for you to just get to know about the program, because at the end of the day, even if it ends up not being what you thought, that's such an important insight to gain, because then maybe that wasn't the best program for you anyways. You know, it's almost like, sure, you're spending a month and you're showing them what it might look like to have you as their resident, but you're also trying to feel out, do I like the residents? Do I like the faculty? Like, are these the people that are going to help me thrive over the next 4 years too? And if the answer to that ends up being no, that's okay. And I think in terms of deciding kind of where to do aways, it really depends. Mine was kind of geographically driven, which is important if you have family or a partner in a certain area, or if you're trying to go back to your home state. But for the other people who did aways, maybe you could talk about why you decided to do aways at certain places too.
Corbin?
Yeah, so I did 3 away rotations, which I think is maybe a bit uncommon in OB-GYN. I did my first one at Mount Sinai in New York. Then the second one is Women and Infants at Brown. Drigo was there at the same time as me, so that's where we met. And then I did a late one in January at Christianacare. The letter, I think I mentioned this earlier, the letter I got from Mount Sinai, I think was a really big impact. It was talked about at a lot of the programs that I interviewed at. I knew I wanted to be in the Northeast. My partner, she's up there in graduate school, so I wanted to be a lot closer to her and everything. And so that's why I kind of primarily targeted Northeast programs. And it helped a lot, even just outside of the letter. You know, when you're on an away rotation, there's this idea, obviously you want to do well and you want to show that program, hey, I really like you, and I want to be here. But, you know, they know that this is a game. You know, they know that you have to apply to a bunch of schools. It's not like you're just going to, hey, I'm only applying to your program. If not you, then nowhere. So a lot of the attendings that, you know, I worked with and got close with, they, you know, they were very open about it. It's like, hey, like, we know you're applying here, obviously, but like, where else do you want to go? You know, hey, I know so-and-so at this place, you know, and even if it's, you know, later in the game where you're not getting a letter from them, you know, if someone says hey, you did a really great job, you know, if you need any help with anything along the road, I don't think that it's out of the sorts to be like, hey, you know, you said you knew so-and-so, or even asking, do you know anybody at this or this program? Could you put in a good word for me? You know, I think a lot of people are afraid to, you know, be somewhere and not and not just impress the people there and be like, hey, I'm also looking at somewhere else. It's the truth of the matter is you're trying to get into residency somewhere, whether it's at the away rotation or somewhere else. I think aways are a good way to expand your network, and not just through a letter, but just through word of mouth and email, anything that kind of helps put the foot in the door. And that's what I was able to do with my 3 aways. And I guess the last piece of advice, I would not do an away rotation in January. Just because like you're just drained at that point. You think you're going to have all this energy and it's like, oh, the last push, but I won't lie, it just wasn't there for me at the last program. Granted, it might've been because I didn't like the program necessarily as much as I thought I would. But I think a lot of it had to do with, it was the end of interview season. And I was just totally just spent. And I just wasn't, being frank, I wasn't putting in as much effort as I was at either of my other 2 away rotations. So if you got one in January, if they're even doing it then, I would consider it before you commit to doing one then.
And then Rodrigo.
Yeah, so as Corbin mentioned, we were both at Brown at the same time. I was on MFM. I think Corbin was on Urogyn. But I did mine mostly because I wanted to see how OB-GYN happened at other places, which I think can be very valuable. Particularly, Brown is unique in that they have a standalone. There are other hospitals like this, but few of them have standalone women's hospitals. So I was just interested to see how that worked. Also, they work really closely with midwives there, and we don't have midwives at UAB. So that's something else I wanted to experience and see how much that mattered to me. And I'm really glad I did, because I realized that I really valued what midwives can teach OB-GYN residents, and I prioritize that when making my rank list to a degree. So that was kind of my motivation for doing my way at Brown. Plus, I also liked Brown's program on paper. I wanted to go see what they were like in person. If I could go back and do anything differently, it's that I made connections there, and I don't think I leveraged them very well. There were 3 attendings that I worked with who I really jived with and really supportive, and were like, keep in touch. And I think at this point in training, if someone says keep in touch, that means like they actually want you to keep in touch to some degree. And I didn't do that. And I think I could have leaned on them a little bit more for different places that they were connected to. So that would be my only advice.
And then kind of going off of that, if you have any advice, things that you wish you had done differently, or things you know now that you wish you had known at the start of this whole process, what would it be? Start with Abby.
Oh gosh. Oh, that's so hard. I think I just wish I had known, I did know this kind of, but you never really know until it happens to you, which is really how competitive OB is getting. I think I heard about it from last year's class, but I feel like when I really started getting interview invites and seeing where I was getting them from and not from, there were definitely some surprises, between me and all of my classmates. And I think it just really hammered home the fact that more people are applying to OBGYN, and we just really need to be strategic with where you apply. And luckily I was, and I was really thankful for that. But I know that there were people who weren't as strategic and ended up kind of falling flat a little bit and maybe being more anxious because they didn't have as many interviews based on where they had applied. And it's so different because it's so personal for each and every person, and everyone has a different journey. But I just think since it is getting increasingly competitive, just be smart with kind of how you treat the cycle, and get a lot of guidance and talk to multiple mentors to just try to put yourself in the best position you can starting out.
Okay, Carissa.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Man, I think I went on more interviews than I needed to be completely honest, which is such a tough position to be in, because it's like you go on more interviews, so you have more places to rank at the end of the day, and having more places to rank makes you feel good when you submit your rank list. But I got really exhausted by the end, so I went on 18 interviews because of couples matching and kind of like the fear around that. And I was so exhausted. I had other friends who went on less and were just a lot happier, I think, throughout the process. So I would just be really, really thoughtful about like why you want to go to a place, whether you truly feel like going to that interview is going to help you. And I think same thing a little bit with applying, though applying is more of a financial issue than it is like a exhaustion issue, if that makes sense. And then I think the other thing too is just like, I actually didn't do any away rotations. I wish I had done maybe 1 or 2 at just different programs that I was interested in on paper to really see what that was like. I feel like I applied to programs that were like, some top programs, and showed up to the interview and was like kind of disappointed because maybe the environment wasn't as friendly as I was hoping for it to be and whatnot. And so while you can't prevent that, it's just like, I think I just wish I had been able to be more thoughtful about certain things, or reached out to people to learn more details about like these different programs before just haphazardly kind of like applying everywhere and interviewing as many places as I could, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think otherwise the field is it's getting a little bit more challenging. And just remember, I think during the process, not to be like, oh, I didn't get an interview here, it must be because something's wrong with my application. Like, it's really not. My classmates, like, I think a lot of what ends up happening is programs pick a handful of people from each school. I don't think that they like, for example, we had 12 people applying for my school. They're not going to interview all 12 people applying from one medical school, or 14 or 20 or whatever it may be. So it does get a little bit random, and just like rely on mentors for help. If there are a few programs that are just like your dream, or you like really, really want like interviews at those programs, it's okay to reach out to people and say like, hey, can you send an email to this program? I really, really want this. So I think those are just some of my like random rambling reflections on the whole process. Sorry, it wasn't like more cohesive.
Oh, it's good. Sarah?
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I wish I utilized my mentors more often. I had a mentor towards the end of it actually make phone calls to program directors that they knew, and I wish that I had utilized that a lot earlier and really took advantage of all my connections and all the networking that I did by going on OAs. I actually did 3 OAs as DO student, were advised to go ahead and do OAs. It's an opportunity to get our foot in the door and to show programs that we really are interested in who we are, especially if our school doesn't really have an affiliation with that program. So I would definitely recommend that for our osteopathic students listening out there. But yeah, I definitely suggest utilizing anybody that you know, or any mentors who are willing to go out on a limb for you and put in some good recommendations about your work ethic from what they've noticed and from working with you.
Jensen?
Yeah, agree with everything. I think I was in a similar position of going on more interviews than I should have, but it was a situation where early on in the season I didn't have a lot, and so I went on ones that I wasn't as thrilled about because I didn't know what it was going to look like. And then by the end of the season, I had this chunk of like 10 interviews where I didn't even know where I was going to rank them, because they were all programs that they just kind of blurred together at the end, and I felt kind of meh about all of them. And so I think that that's something you run the risk of. And also then if you have a program that you really love, that's at the end, you just lose track and things blur together, and you won't be as sharp as you were at the beginning. So it's kind of hard to give advice about that, but just kind of weigh your cards as best you can. And as you're going through the cycle, if you realize that you have an interview that you aren't that thrilled about even going in, and you have enough that you are thrilled about, just drop it, because it can go to someone else, and then you won't, like, obviously you want to look out for yourself and make sure that you match. Everyone's trying to do that, everyone wants to, but you will know if you have things that you can let go of, and you should really do that if you can. And I agree about reaching out to mentors. I kind of checked in with mine a little bit late, just to be like, hey, just keeping you updated. I feel like I owe you an update, like things are going however they're going. And then they were all like, okay, like here's our game plan, we're going to do this, this, and this. And they were so excited and eager to help. And if I had known that, I would have done it way earlier. So just assume that they're willing to help, because if they offer help, they are, and take them up on it, because they can do amazing things, and it's worth trying.
Rodrigo?
I mentioned this already a little bit, but I wish I'd really allowed myself the time to think about what it was I wanted at a program, and that would have guided which programs I selected to apply to a little bit. like I said, I applied to a lot of community programs, and I went on a few interviews to those programs because they were in my region and they were kind of less competitive. Also, I just want to put the disclaimer out: when we say competitive versus less competitive, that's not to say that the less competitive programs are somehow less quality. It's just like how many people want to go there based on a perceived like either prestige or like ability to get into fellowship, etc. So I don't want anyone to walk in here thinking that we're saying there are some programs that are, they're so individualized based on what you want, what you need. That's a lot of this is from individual perspective. So I don't want anyone to think like that we're advocating for some like hierarchical system of quality. End of disclaimer. Anyways, so I went on these interviews, and just in the middle of them, I realized this is not the kind of program I want to be at. I wish I'd saved this interview to go on a different, different program, or that I applied to a different program. And they were super nice, and they're, I just felt bad kind of that I was taking up a spot interviewing with them, when if I'd really taken the time to realize like I probably want to do a fellowship, and so some of these community programs weren't going to position me well enough to do the things that I wanted to do after residency. So really give yourself a good amount of space and time to do that.
And then Corbin.
Yeah, a lot of echoing what folks before were saying. Leverage your network as much as possible. Like it's never too late to keep expanding your network and using that to your advantage to help you out. You're never, you should never feel like you can't ask somebody for help if there's any time you need help or assistance or a favor, what I call it. Application season is the time. And then even what, Drew was saying as well, I knew going before I wanted to do fellowship. So I even got asked at some of the, community programs I ended up interviewing at. They were like, hey, we don't really put out a lot of fellows at all, but your application and everything, what we've talked about seems like you really want to do fellowship, and you can't really talk your way out of that as well. At least I don't think that I talked my way out of it very well. So I think keeping that in mind, can affect how you want to shape your application to say, hey, yeah, maybe like I'm open to fellowship versus like, hey, like I definitely want to do fellowship and I want to do X, Y, or Z. Because you don't want to kind of like put yourself in a corner before you even have a chance to explain yourself.
Okay. I know there's some questions going on in the chat, and then also kind of beforehand, we're talking about what advice we give for people who maybe aren't at that going into M4 already decided on OB, but are either interested in it or are like deciding on it, what advice we have for them, and especially if like you didn't initially think about going into OBGYN. So we'll start off with Parissa.
I was also answering a question in the chat. Can you repeat the question really quick?
Oh, sorry, we're just talking about any advice you have for M1, M2, or M3s, people who either are interested in OB and know that's what they want to do, or people who haven't decided yet.
Yeah, so I'll say, like, I came into med school dead set on general surgery. Like, if you ask anyone, they're shocked that I like changed my mind like at the end of the day. So I think some of the advice actually that's been in the chat is really helpful. Stay open-minded, like no matter what you do. I went into the wards very closed-minded, but then like had my surgery rotation last, so I was kind of forced to be like excited about whatever was in front of me, and actually enjoyed every single specialty I like had a rotation with, plus or minus maybe a couple. And so I think that's really important. If you have something you're passionate about now, whether it's related to like a specific specialty or like an advocacy thing or a leadership thing, like really just like dive into it, like enjoy it, like find mentors, reach out to faculty members. I think one of the things that I did that really helped me during med school was like very quickly connect with faculty members who had interests similar to mine, which for me was like global health. And those people helped me throughout my entire time in med school, kind of regardless of what my specialty ended up being. Like my trauma surgery mentor was one of my greatest advocates for like me going into OBGYN, and was like totally okay with that. So I would say like find like-minded people, like stick with them, go with your passion. And if the passion changes, tell yourself that it's okay, and then like run with whatever that new thing is. Cause like things changed for me and it was a little hard, but I think just like be open to where med school is going to take you.
Sarah?
I kind of had an inkling that I wanted to do OB-GYN throughout the entirety of medical school, but I would definitely echo, be open-minded when you go through all your clerkships. I think you can take away different skills and different things from every single rotation that you can apply again when you go on your interviews and kind of just show how well-rounded you are.
Rodrigo?
Similar to some folks in here, I didn't think OB wasn't on my radar at all until I got to my OB clerkship. I thought I was going to do emergency medicine. That's all I had eyes for the first 2 years of med school. I was at all the emergency medicine interest group meetings, and then I got to third year, and my emergency medicine elective was my second thing I did of third year, which I'm glad it was, because I realized that it was not what I expected or what I wanted. So just to echo Parissa, you should work on things in your first 2 years. First of all, focus on your coursework. That I think is first and foremost. You're there, to learn. It's Granddaddy Drigo's advice. Second off, only work on things you're really passionate about. I wouldn't approach things as, oh, this is going to look good on my application. This really fits into my narrative of wanting to be an emergency doc. Find projects that make you happy, that you don't mind spending the extra time on top of all the studying you're doing, and it'll show both in what you get out of it and then when you get to talk about it on residency interviews later. And then go into third year with a really open mind. After I decided to nix emergency early in my third year, I went into every clerkship saying, all right, let's learn what we're going to learn here. And I got to my OB clerkship, and because I had that open mind, I allowed myself to fall in love with it, and here I am.
Corbin?
Yeah, similar to Drigo and Parissa. I went into, honestly, I thought I was going to be ortho from like high school. But like most people, they had some type of ortho injury. They kind of just set their mind on it. And so I was like SLU's like Mr. Ortho guy up until I think like halfway through third year is when I finally decided to switch. But, kind of like what everyone was saying, you keep this open mind of things. And that just allows you to like kind of soak in every experience and really say, hey, is this what I actually want to do, with my life or not? And that helped me decide that ortho is not actually what I want to do. And that OB-GYN is more so like suits my personality and the things that I'm actually interested in. But I think with that being said, and I think this kind of ties into other people's questions about, OB-GYN research, OB-GYN related things, this and that. If you have a passion, it doesn't have to be OB-GYN. You're kind of hoping that, all of us are passionate about something outside of what our career is going to be. We weren't OB-GYNs from the time we were born. You grew up liking something, you do something in your free time that, you're passionate about. And those are the things I think you can tie together in your application. Like I was saying before, for me, a lot of it was soccer. And I was able to talk about soccer and talk about coaching and whatnot, instead of having to just, fit my entire application around, hey, this is why I want to do OB-GYN instead of ortho. Because I was able to explain that away, honestly, in a couple sentences and use the rest of my application to really talk about, hey, this is who I am as a person. And those attributes about me is what's going to make me a great, OB-GYN. And I think that was just able to happen because I was just so open-minded about things and just open to any type of experience that I could have, whether in life, in med school, and even outside of med school.
And Abby?
Yeah, so I initially came in thinking about maybe family medicine and with an obstetrics fellowship as kind of a way to do women's health, but ended up really loving surgery more than I expected. And I think kind of echoing what everyone else said, just really keep an open mind and kind of really analyze and think about what pieces of each rotation you're enjoying and not enjoying, and kind of figure out how you can roll all of your interests into one. And talk with people, talk with fourth years, residents, people that did OBGYN, and maybe people who didn't too, maybe people who were thinking about doing OB but decided on something else, whether it be emergency medicine, surgery, family medicine, whatever, and just see why they decided not to go for it. If there's anything that can help you in kind of your decision making, to know that it's the right thing for you. And I think another thing, just to encourage people, if after you match and everything, it feels like you are stuck, but if you get into a program, and whether it's OB or not, and you feel like it isn't the right specialty or not the right fit for you, you're definitely not locked in, and you can change your pathway. It's not easy, but there are plenty of people who do it, and it's not impossible. So I know it really feels like we're locked in, but there are more options. It's just, it takes some exploring and some time to try to figure out what you might want.
And I know Jensen already kind of answered that question in the chat. So we'll kind of go to another question, which is, why did you choose OBGYN? And if you're interested in a fellowship, why are you interested in that fellowship? And we'll start with Jensen.
All right. So as I said, I was interested in radiation oncology from like very early on in first year, and kind of did everything planning for that because the hurdle to get into that as an IMG is pretty significant. Shockingly smaller than OB-GYN, I would say, but that's a story for another time. But OB-GYN was really not on my radar at all. I came into med school, I was like, I'm gonna keep an open mind, except for OB-GYN, definitely not doing that. And then during my third year rotation, like other people would comment on it. Like when people were just like, ugh, I really don't want to be here. I wasn't one of them. And OB-GYN is a really polarizing field. If you haven't done your rotation yet, you'll probably see that. There's a camp of people who are just really not having any of it. And then if you're the person who's like, ooh, I want to do every single thing, I love every second of this, it hits different than the other specialties, I think. Like I tried to be open and enjoyed all of my rotations, but OB-GYN, I was just like, this is the one. And now I know what it feels like to know what the one is. And then after that, obviously I kind of had a panic moment because this was late in my third year. And so I didn't want to I had to really dramatically make the switch. And because at my program, the beginning of fourth year, you do a bunch of away rotations in the States, and those obviously carry a lot of weight because you're applying. So you need to know what you want to do by then. And so I kind of had to go all in to OB-GYN. And the way that I confirmed that that's what I wanted is, I spoke to all the people I knew who chose the field and kind of tried to get their take on how they knew. Everyone has their cute little story about it. But at the end of the day, you just have to think about like what's really going to drive you every single day, because it's less about what's interesting and what's cool, because everything's interesting and cool. Like you're all nerds, we're all doing medicine, you're going to learn every single day no matter what job you choose, and there's going to be boring stuff no matter what job you choose. But it's the thing where the motivation behind the work, that's what has to get you to get up every day. And for me with OB-GYN, it was no question. The population we work with, it will never get old to me. And you'll find your calling in that sense, I guess, or I don't like that word, but you'll find your thing. And then for subspecialties, I think I'm more interested in the like reproductive side of things. So REI, MFM, maybe even family planning. But I'm really not sure. One thing, sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but one thing I'll add about it is when I made the switch to OB-GYN, I was really unsure about the surgery part. I wasn't sure if I could handle surgery, if I like surgery, if I'd be any good at it. And so I made a point, I did 2 gyn-onc sub-Is, which like I don't necessarily recommend to anyone, but it was really helpful for me to see like, okay, like I can do this, this is fun, I'm still into it. And yeah, so if there's like, I know a lot of people have a part of the specialty that they don't necessarily think that they love. And so throwing yourself into it is a really good way to see if you like it enough to continue and maybe you actually love it.
Okay, and then Sarah?
Yeah, so I knew that OB-GYN was something that I was interested in just because I did a lot of volunteering with my local church, with empowering women in different associations. So I knew I had a gravity towards that patient population. I also love how for the most part, the patients are healthier and you're dealing with them in a happier time. So I like that as well. But ultimately, I wanted to be in the operating room and have that surgical experience, but also without compromising and giving up the office and the continuity of care. So with OB-GYN, I feel like it's the perfect marriage of both of them, and you can keep them both if you want to. And for me, I want to be a generalist, and so I have the luxury of doing both of them or continuing them, or giving up the obstetrics and continuing with the gyn. And so that's ultimately how I arrived to OB-GYN. And then with fellowship, 2 out of my 3 sub-Is I did in specialties. I did an MFM as well as gyn-onc. So I had exposure to both of them, and I think that that's a great opportunity for you to explore different of the subspecialties and see if you are interested in it or not. And so if you are going to do auditions, that could be something that you look into where you will get experience at, different institutions and see how they operate, as well as, in the different subspecialties as well.
Carissa?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I was like dead set on general surgery, and like through each of my core rotations, I was like, okay, I'm just waiting for the surgery rotation. I mean, I'm loving this, but like I'm sure I'm gonna love gen surg like way more than everything else. And I got to my OBGYN clerkship, started out on gynonc, and was like, wow, these are the nicest surgeons I've ever met in my life. So that was like kind of my like very first like day of the OB clerkship. But then as I went through, I was like, I really love the patient population. Like I felt like I was going home every day and feeling like really excited about what we were doing. I felt like we were actually helping people. I felt like OBGYN encapsulated like what I thought it meant to be a physician, which was like being in clinic, doing surgery, being there for happy moments and being there for the saddest moments, doing some trauma and like some emergencies, but also having like, gyne clinic, which is a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more relaxed. So that was like my first experience. And at one point I remember I had a meeting like in the middle of gyne clinic that I was allowed to leave for. And I was like, I'm actually loving gyne clinic so much, I don't really want to go to this meeting. And I rescheduled the meeting, which is really bizarre to do. So that was like kind of where I got my first inkling. I think by the time I finished clerkships though, I was still really nervous about making a final decision. It just felt like this is the rest of my life. I really need to make sure that I'm like 100% sure about this. At my school, I did clerkships during second year. So I actually had the entire third year to do extra rotations. So I did a gyn-onc sub-I, a surg-onc sub-I, and a medicine sub-I, like all back to back, which I don't recommend. But that like really helped me. And by the end of it, I was like, OBGYN was definitely where I felt like the happiest. I will say that once I got away from doing the clinical rotations and went back to doing kind of like electives and other things, I got nervous again about making a final decision. So just be patient with yourself. It's not for everyone that it like clicks and that's it. It might take a lot of like mental, like talking to people and asking people around you where you fit best and really thinking through things. I think when it really hit home though was when I was on the interview trail and I started meeting like people within the field of OBGYN. I was like, yes, like Rodrigo, Bronwyn, like several others. I was like, these are my people. Like, and I felt like as OBGYNs, we were advocating on a daily basis. And that felt so meaningful to me. And I was like, okay, this is all coming together now. And I finally am like at peace with everything. So just to say that it's not a perfect journey for everybody. And that's okay. So
we're all very happy that you decided to do OBGYN. Abby.
Yeah, so like I'd mentioned earlier, I came in thinking family medicine, maybe with an obstetrics fellowship, because in college I had actually taken a physiology of repro class, and I really loved learning about reproductive sciences, but I thought maybe I would want to be a primary care provider, so I decided maybe on family to kind of blend the two. And it was really when I started volunteering in family medicine first and second year that I realized I didn't really like that. So then I didn't really know what to do and kind of just let third year rotations take me wherever they were going to take me. OBGYN ended up actually being my first rotation of third year. So it was kind of difficult because I had nothing else to compare it to. So I really didn't decide on it firmly until quite some time afterwards, because I kind of just let myself go through medicine, peds, surgery to really see what parts of them I did and did not like and compare back to OB and think about what I did and didn't like. But I think at the end of the day, like a lot of people had echoed, I think on OBGYN I was most happy with the people that I was spending time with the patients that I was spending time with, and certainly the most motivated to go home and actually learn about the subject matter. And I feel like it really says something, when you're tired and when you're coming home from cases and rotations, it's like, what do you actually want to learn about? Like, what do you find yourself gravitating toward? What can you stand reading about at like 11 o'clock after you've gotten out of the OR and have to be back in like 6 hours? And that is important. And it really just says everything about where your passions lie.
Corbin?
Yeah, definitely echoing a lot with what everyone before had said. I mean, for me, it was, I thought I was going to do ortho, did OB-GYN actually slightly early. I think it was like my second rotation or so. And it was really, I started on OB nights, and to me, I was like, okay, I just want to like, you know, catch some babies, and this should be like fun. And I actually like loved it. I think, you know, as much as I want to do like focus on GYN and do like surgeries, I think my favorite rotation all third year was OB nights. And that's what kind of like ticked it on my radar. And then I did about 6 weeks or so of like the GYN surgeries. And that's when I started really getting into Urogyne and Gyn-Onc especially. And I think it's, again, one of those things that before I had come to med school, I worked in a human embryonic stem cell lab. And there's a lot of the stuff that we were discussing in our Gyn-Onc, you know, reviews and cases and stuff was reminiscent of what I had done that research in. And so I was like, oh, this is like really fun because I enjoyed that. I'm going to enjoy this as well. And so combining that with just, you know, oh, I have a lot of like, or the physicians at the time, I have a lot of longitudinal relationships with their patients. I wasn't getting that, you know, in any of the ortho clinics and stuff that I had been working in and done, you know, shadowing and all that stuff for rotations. So when I ended up doing my surgery rotation, you know, December or so, I was like, okay, I'm not feeling the same, you know, fulfillment that I had when I was on my GYN surgery and OB and obstetrics rotation. So it's kind of one of those things, I think like Chris was saying, it's like, it doesn't have to be an aha moment. It was kind of like, okay, this was really great. Is anything else stacking up to it? Or something that I thought would stack up to it didn't necessarily. And so then after that, I was like, well, this is, you know, my favorite thing that I've done so far. So let me just stick with this.
Okay, and then Rodrigo.
Yeah, I'll just be quick about it. I did a stat C-section. I didn't do the stat C-section. I scrubbed on a stat. That would be wild, right? I scrubbed on a stat C-section my second night of my OB clerkship, and I was just like a jolt. And I realized that I could get a lot of the things that I liked about emergency medicine and OB. And then every experience I had in OB from there on out solidified the decision for me. Specialty-wise, part of our clerkship, we spent 2 weeks on Gyn-Onc, and those were my favorite 2 weeks of med school. They were also the hardest 2 weeks that I have had in med school. I just really like that patient population. I really love being in the OR. I find the way that Gyn-Oncs manage both the surgery and the therapies for the cancer, as well as kind of when they come in critically ill, I like that kind of ownership that they have. So that's why I'm kind of leaning that way right now.
Okay, so now we're going to just wrap up with our last question, and that is for each person on the panel to give a one-sentence advice that they think is the most helpful for the application cycle. I will just start to give everybody a little bit of time, and that is control the controllables. There are a lot of things you can't control, but make sure that you do what you can for the things you can. And then Rodrigo.
I would say think really hard about what it is you want in OB and afterwards, and make your rank list, well, before that, your application list and your rank list reflect that.
Corbin.
The biggest thing I would say is remember to be yourself. I promise each person applying, you are already impressive. So don't try to go out on a limb to impress somebody, because I'm sure they can probably tell if you're just trying too hard. So just be yourself.
Sarah.
Yeah, just to be honest and with yourself about where you fall and where your aspirations are and what you really want, and really do a deep dive within yourself, and that'll help guide you make all the decisions that you need when it comes down to picking programs and constructing your rank list.
Jensen.
I think remember to stay excited, because you're going to spend so much time ruminating on your strengths and your weaknesses and how each thing went and what you could have done better and all these things. But at the end of the day, this is the beginning of the career that you've worked really hard for, and it's an exciting time, and it is stressful, but just try and remember like once every few days that you're so freaking excited to do this, because you need that to get through it.
Carissa.
I would just say be confident in yourself and know that if things don't work out with a particular program or at a particular interview, that it just wasn't meant to be, and that the right program for you is out there, and you will have 5 to potentially 12 wonderful new people to meet at the end of this journey. But then also like tons and tons of wonderful people that you'll meet like along the way too.
Abby.
Yeah, I think kind of going off of what Parissa said, as stressful as this whole process is, maybe just trying to keep in the back of your mind to trust the match. I mean, and I hope everyone feels that way after going through it. But I think even if what you get ends up being kind of a surprise, I feel like a lot of people end up being really thankful for what they did get and realizing in hindsight, like, oh my God, why did I rank that program first? Like, I would have been so unhappy there, and where I ended up matching is so much of a better fit for me. And I know not everybody feels that way. There are certainly the outliers, but I think the great majority of people do end up kind of feeling that that hindsight being 2020 at the end of it. So just to kind of have a little bit of faith and trust in the process through the craziness.
And Sarah, did I already ask you, or? Okay. So I think that kind of concludes everything. I think Rodrigo might have a message about giving out our contact information, so I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining in. I hope this was useful. This session has been recorded. It'll be available as an unlisted link on YouTube. I will send that link out, as well as all the panelists' contact information, probably tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon, depending on when I wake up. And finally, I know that there's a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen with the ways and how programs are going to handle disruptions due to COVID-19. Just know that APCO, the Association of Professors in Gynecology and Obstetrics, are putting together kind of a guidance for residency programs and applicants on what their suggestions are going to be for how to handle this disruption. So that's coming down. Not a lot of information to share until that actually gets released officially, unfortunately, but hopefully that makes you feel a little bit more at ease that there are people obviously talking about this and thinking about this, and we're all going to get through this together. So I'm going to end the meeting now. So thank you, panelists, and thank you for coming on.
Rodrigo, one quick question. Someone asked where the recording is going to go in the chat.
It's going to be on YouTube, and I'll send out the link tomorrow once I've uploaded it. Bye, everyone.